My name is Steve Lopez. I'm a columnist with the LA Times. And beginning early in 2018, my colleague Francine Orr, photographer at the Times, and I decided we wanted to focus this year on child poverty. So we have done a number of stories, and I believe it was late summer that I had a sit down with the new LA Unified Superintendent, Austin Buettner. This was at Cortinas High School, and we tried the coffee cake that day, the famous LA Unified coffee cake. And we were talking about how it was going, and Austin, you were still getting your feet wet, and we were talking, I think, about some of the challenges and about child poverty. And you mentioned that there were a couple of schools in the Valley, San Fernando Valley, that had really high percentages of students classified as homeless. I believe the other one was Napa, right. And then Telfair. So I ended up focusing on Telfair for a 4-part series with Francine Orr. But I want to go back to what your reaction was, your thoughts, when you learned as a new superintendent of LA Unified with something like, 1,100 campuses, that you had schools where a quarter of the students were homeless. Was that news to you, and how did you react?
Maybe not news, but when you see it, when you visit with the students, you have this visceral sense that this can't stand. So I came into this job with expectations about some of the challenges, and some of the challenges we have about closing opportunity gaps and helping students achieve their full potential. But you visit Napa, you visit Telfair, and you see students who are experiencing some form of homelessness, and you go, this just can't be. This is Los Angeles, it's not Timbuktu. And the sense of immediacy, I guess, grabs you, that we have to do something about this now.
Kelly, the Telfair school, and I suppose Napa as well, are those both in the district that you represent?
Napa is not, Telfair is, as well as 3 of the top 4 schools in terms of our number of homelessness are in my board district.
So what are the others besides Telfair?
Langdon Elementary, Sepulveda Middle School, and Monroe High School, all in North Hills.
And before you joined the board, were you aware of those kinds of numbers?
I was aware that there were serious homelessness issues in the East San Fernando Valley. I don't think I realized the scope. So I wouldn't have guessed that 25% of kids at Telfair are homeless. I would guess that there was a high rate, but not that specific number.
Yeah, we should clarify for people who are wondering when we use the word homeless. We're not talking about students who are camped in tents outside the front office. We're talking about the student residency questionnaire that families have to fill out, and you've got to check boxes. Do you live in your own home? Do you live in a motel? Do you live in a shelter? Do you live in a vehicle? Do you live in a shared apartment or a home with other families who own the property? And that's where we get most of the kids who are classified as homeless are in shared units.
Right.
And at Telfair, there's a really high percentage, over 30% of them living in garages. That number struck me, I'm not sure why, I guess because I grew up in a time when the garage was where you put the lawnmower and the motor oil. And 31%, I think, at Telfair. So we visited some of these garages. They've been converted, they're kind of like studio apartments, like 1-bedroom apartments. But there are a number of problems associated with living in a situation like that. The principal of Telfair, Jose Razo, lived for a while in a garage that didn't have running water and didn't have a bathroom. Even though those students are housed, are you still concerned about the issues that they bring to school, maybe because they don't have enough privacy, they don't have a quiet place for homework? And then what can we do about this? What can we do about, what can you as school officials do about problems that are usually dealt with by other public agencies? Austin?
Sure. I think conceptually you can think about 2 parts. There's the roof and structure and stability in their life, which is a broader citywide, countywide conversation. And there's the social emotional support that we can provide to that student and their family. And let's leave the first one aside for a moment. We come back and talk about how this city permits plans and allows for housing to be built. On the social emotional support side, you say, we know what we can do for the student. We can make sure they feel safe and welcome. We can feed them breakfast. We can make sure their day is rich and they're learning. But that child comes with, as you said, a certain set of trauma from home, a less than ideal, less than stable life. They might have that trauma they bring to school every day. There might be uncertainty as to what a meal looks like when they get home. That family member may be out of work. Another family member may be dealing with incarceration or a different set of issues. And so that complete set of things, we have to be, I think, like this with the city and county, because we can help that child succeed in school. But the rest we have to be doing as sort of a team and thinking of the child as the center. And I think that's what struck me when I went to Telfair, which is schools are community organizations at their heart. We're the center of the community, and the child is the center of the school. Shouldn't we all be trying to heal that community and heal that child from the school as the foundation with the help of the county and the city?
Well, you both signed the letter that was sent to, I think, Mayor Garcetti and to Herb Wesson, the City Council President, as well as to the Board of Supervisors. It was signed by the two of you and by Jose Razo, the principal of Telfair. Have either of you heard a word from anybody at the city or county level?
Not since then, no. But what I will say is, sort of building off of what Austin was just talking about, I think in addition to building those socio-emotional supports, we know that the school district is also a large property owner in the county. And so in response to the situation at Telfair, as well as some of the other schools in my board district, I authored a resolution to ask for the superintendent to provide an analysis of ways that the LAUSD could potentially provide temporary or permanent shelter for our students on our facilities. So I think we're, in addition to doing everything we can in terms of socio-emotional supports and counseling and meals at school for homeless students and for other students in poverty, I think we also want to be a voice in this larger conversation around how do we increase access to affordable housing, because that's the root cause of the challenges our students are facing.
Kelly, I think you had told me in one of our conversations that there's some models for that. Are there some school districts that are doing that sort of?
Yes, there's a couple. So Dallas Unified School District is converting an unused elementary school to a shelter for teens, where there will not only be housing, but also educational services, other wraparound services for those students. And then the more comparable example, I think San Francisco Unified just opened a shelter at one of their gyms for the students at an elementary school. And it's getting a really positive response. It's a pilot program that just started.
Austin, have you heard any response from any of the people you wrote to?
So it's a longer conversation with the city and the county. At the same time I had breakfast with you, I also had that same conversation with the mayor, same conversation with members of city council, and same conversation with some of the county supervisors, which is, there are examples. There are examples where Tacoma, Washington, they've said, we're going to prioritize all of our services around students who are part of a family, those students being in school. And shouldn't we do that? And I think part of my impetus to write the letter together with Kelly and Jose was, we can't wait. This is a crisis of our time in this moment for those students. And if you look at what is needed, we're funded to provide support to students. We're not actually funded, we don't receive funding from the state to provide the support a homeless family needs. But we should be working together on that. We have a very specific set of formulas the state prescribes us with, where there is no increase in our funding irrespective of whether a student's experiencing homelessness or not. There should be. There's no particular differential in the funding formula based on whether we're serving special populations like students with needs, students with disabilities, versus a census-based population. So there's some other broader conversations about making sure we have adequate resources to do the job for our students that expand even beyond this crisis that we're facing at the moment with these students.
I believe in that letter you referenced H and HHH.
Correct.
And the money that's available for housing and services. And I don't know that there had been any consideration before I saw that in there, that we take into account the needs of students in the nation's second largest school district. It seems to me like it should have been an obvious consideration.
Well, yeah, obvious for several reasons. First, visit Telfair as you and Francine have done, and you'll see the need. But you can also look at the information statistics. 80% of students who experience homelessness as a child will experience again as an adult. If we want to really solve this problem not just today and tomorrow, but for years to come. Let's make sure students are a priority, children are a priority, and the families who come with them, to make sure their families have job support, training, health services that they might need, and a stable and safe place in which to live.
Kelly, that resolution that you mentioned,
Yeah.
that you proposed, it had a lot of things in it. Can you
It did.
can you tell us a little bit about that, about what you think
Yeah.
the biggest priorities are there?
Absolutely. And what I will add in response to, being partners with the city and with the county, the mayor's office was supportive of the resolution. They came to speak in support of it. And so I think in response to the implementation of that resolution, we'll be in constant contact with them. But the resolution did two things. First was to ask Superintendent Buhner to provide an analysis of our district property and ways in which we could open up parking lots, gymnasiums, use vacant and underutilized property to create permanent or temporary housing for our homeless students. And then the other piece was really focused on deepening the supports we already provide to our homeless students. We have a homeless education program, which right now provides wraparound services, counseling, school supplies, other basic necessities like toiletries to our homeless students. And so we really want to look at that program and think about ways we can deepen those supports, as well as increase the supports that exist at the school site for homeless students, because we know the school site is where they're getting the most interaction with adults from LAUSD.
I keep saying this, and I don't think anybody is listening, but I didn't come up with this on my own. I was covering presidential candidates many years ago and spending time with each of them. And the New Jersey Senator Bill Bradley would say in his stump speech that we have a lot of issues in America, and we have a lot of neighborhoods that are struggling. And in many of those neighborhoods, there's a safe place, there's an oasis. It's a school, and it's the only place in the neighborhood that has the resources that families need. It's got recreational facilities, the gymnasium, it's got a library. It's got all of these parents who have jobs and know a trade. Why do we lock the doors at 3 p.m.? Now, I know it's not, we don't lock the doors at 3 everywhere. We've got LA's Best and we've got other programs, but it seems to me that if I could be in charge for a day, I would like to reimagine school campuses as community centers, as places where there's a buy-in from local merchants, from nonprofits, from everybody, and make these safe places of enrichment.
Safe and accessible. So right now we do lock them on the weekends. That makes no sense. We have 1,200 some odd schools for whom many of the students we serve, that is their park. So they can play in the basketball court during the week and the soccer field during the week, and on the weekends, we don't have the resource. We don't have the funding to open the gate, if you will, which we should. We're actually going to do a camp for the students at Telfair the first week of the break. And we have a local bike shop donating bikes. We have our Teamster labor partners donating food baskets and transportation. LA football clubs open their doors, and the students are going to come for an experience on the field. LA 84 is coming to provide coaches. It's that community in support of students and families in the community we think is 100% spot on with Senator Bradley from years ago. Schools are the center of community, and if you have healthy schools, you'll have healthy communities over time. But we need to make sure we're making that investment.
Oh, how do we get that going? Why do I keep talking about it and nothing ever happens? And what can you do to make this a reality?
Well, so a couple of parts. First is we do need to re-engage the community and make them a welcomed partner, make it easier for anybody who wants to provide service or volunteer at a school to become to a school. So for instance, we have solved the riddle of fingerprinting. We've made it very, very hard for families to volunteer at schools. We've actually cleaned that up. That's a good thing. It'll be easier to volunteer at your kid's school. And then there is this elephant in the corner of the room that we are underfunded. In a generation, California's gone from top of the charts in student achievement and outcomes, top of the charts in funding, to bottom of the charts in funding and bottom of the charts in outcomes. And I think those two are correlated. So we should be in a conversation as a community together. Us, our families, our community members, our labor partners, we should be on our yellow buses going to Sacramento together and having a conversation to say, how do we think about the long-term sustainability of Los Angeles where the foundation is public education? All three of us, public school kids, that's our foundation which brings us here. We have to rebuild that foundation for the next generation. It's going to take resources to do it.
Well, let me ride that thought by kicking a reader question over to Kelly. It's the same idea. This is from a reader named Lisa. We got quite a few questions sent our way when the 4-part series ran. Lisa asks, how can we push to have the schools be properly funded for things like libraries and nurses? And I think the reason Lisa mentions libraries and nurses is because it really is unacceptable, if not downright shameful, given the need that students have. That there are so many schools where the libraries, if they're open at all, it's 1 or 2 days. And librarians are a thing of the past. And at Telfair, given the trauma so many of those kids are experiencing, the nurse is there maybe a couple days a week and no psychiatric social worker.
Right.
So how can we push to have the schools properly funded?
Absolutely. Well, I think Austin pointed this out. The majority of our funding comes from the state. And so we're 46th in the nation when it comes to per pupil spending. While New York is spending $22,000 per pupil, California on average is close to $11,000 per pupil. And so this challenge of having access to all of the resources that our kids need, counselors, nurses, librarians, is not just an LA Unified problem, but it's really a California problem. California has the highest caseloads for counselors, has the highest class sizes of many of the states in the country, and I think that really results from the lack of investment in public education. And not only do we need to get to the average, or I would hope the top tier when it comes to education spending, we also need to make sure we're giving more supports to the kids who deserve it the most. Like Austin pointed out, we're under the local control funding formula, which means that students who have greater needs, generally speaking, should be getting additional resources from the state. However, homeless students aren't included in that formula. There is no dedicated source of funding for homeless students in the same way there is for other students. And so if we could get the state not just to invest more, but to invest more equitably, I think we would be able to provide a lot more of those resources for our kids.
Telfair Elementary is a so-called traditional school. This is a district that has quite a few charter schools. We've got magnets. We've got a lot of everything. The purpose of this series was not to politicize, the charter movement, teachers union versus administration and school boards and all of that. I did have a conversation though with Principal Razzo, more than one conversation, about the challenges that he faces. And one of them is this, that because families have more options, and it's great that families do have options, and we all know that there's some terrific charters, he's losing students because he's competing with 4 or 5. I think maybe the nearest one is Vaughan, or I could be wrong about that. But he said, I'm losing students when I'm doing the best I can with what I have. Because I've got fewer students, I've got fewer resources. And those charters can market. They can advertise and tell the community what a great job they're doing, and I don't have a budget for that. Yeah. So is this fair competition? Is that something that we need to be concerned about? And what would you say to Principal Razzo about that?
Well, I mean, I have a lot of conversations with Principal Razzo. He's actually on a task force of sorts that I've assembled with the superintendent for principals to give their feedback and really make sure that the school district policies are reflecting their needs. When it comes to charter schools, I think it's about making sure that they're playing by the rules, that we're holding them accountable, and that we're ensuring that they're serving all students. I think historically, charter schools have not served as many students with disabilities, for example, and that's been something where the burden has fallen on traditional public schools, because students with disabilities, if they have more severe disabilities, are more expensive to educate. And so the school district, I think, has been working really hard in our oversight to make sure that charter schools are serving all kids. When it comes to the specific needs at Telfair, though, I think it's about the school district investing equitably in those students, knowing how many needs they have. And it's about us telling the stories of success, because I think unfortunately in the news too often we're only talking about schools when something goes wrong. But when I visit Telfair Elementary, I remember my visit. I remember it was crazy hair day and Principal Razzo had his buzz cut dyed green, and I remember when we entered the classroom, students were joyful when they were learning. And those are successes that we have to tell, not just to parents in that community, but more broadly throughout Los Angeles, because our schools are doing great things and they should be highlighted for that.
When you see the test scores, though, and you see them at Telfair, where they are a little below the district average, and by test scores I mean math and language skills. And I'm talking about the most recent state scores. They were behind the state average, even behind LA Unified's average. When you look at that, Austin, do you think that school is just not doing its job?
I look at it maybe through a different lens, Steve, which is if I visit the second grade classroom at Telfair, I can ask them a series of questions. They'll get the first 2 wrong, and they'll get the next 4 right. How many schools in Los Angeles Unified? 1, 2, because someone has a middle school sibling, 2,000, 20,000 because they're second graders. The answer is about 1,200. I'll ask how many students in Los Angeles Unified? About 700,000 in total, if you include every type of student that we serve the needs of. They won't get that one either. It's a big number. Then I'll ask 4 questions they always get right. Most important school? Telfair. Most important classroom? Their classroom. The best teacher? Their teacher. And the most important student? Each of them. Now, out of the mouths of children sometimes comes profound learning. That should be the organizing principle of schools. That's the organizing principle of education. Great teacher connecting with that student in that classroom. The LA Unified of today is not that. The LA Unified of today, if you mapped an organization chart of this organization, it looks like a 3-headed squid of some sort, tentacles. So on any given day, the number of departments or department heads who might issue a directive to Principal Razos, extraordinary. The number of places he might have to go to get a simple yes or no, extraordinary. So part of what I think is going to help Jose and his colleagues in the classroom is if we can streamline, focus, make more simple the job he has to do, because his time is spent with children, it's spent with educators, it's spent with families, and everything else doesn't allow him to achieve that mission of helping his students learn. So that's the path, the foundation to better student outcome.
It's also about growth, I would say, though. We know that in LAUSD we're serving a quarter of the students' poor children are in LA Unified, even though our district does not encompass a quarter of the kids in California. We know that we're serving the most English language learners out of any school district in the country. And so I think it's not just about looking at those raw test scores, but it's looking at what progress are our students making. And I know at Telfair, their scores grew this year compared to last year. We might not yet be at the average, but it's really about telling that story of progress. Another school highlight, Langdon Elementary, which is tied with Telfair for the most homeless students this year. They grew 10 points in math and English on the test score. So they may not be at the average, but they're helping students with serious challenges grow and make progress, and I think that's what we need to focus on.
We've talked here about, gee, it would be nice if we weren't 46th in the nation, or depending on which calculation you use, because others say, no, you're closer to the middle of the pack in California. Let's assume for a minute we're not getting another nickel, because that's probably the political reality, unless Governor-elect Newsom is going to make a bigger commitment in some ways than Governor Brown did. But let's say there's no more money. Will we, if we were to meet in 10 years, will we still be wondering why Telfair doesn't have a nurse, or and why the library is closed? What can you do to improve those kinds of situations if there is no more money? If that's unacceptable, if this level of homelessness cannot stand, but there is no more money from the state, we don't get a lot of support from Herb Wesson or Eric Garcetti or the Board of Supervisors, what can LA Unified do?
Go ahead.
Well, again, you're accepting, I don't want to say failure, but you're accepting a status quo and saying that's what we're going to have. I don't accept that. I don't accept the voters in Los Angeles heard he spoke in volumes between H and Triple H and said, we will tax ourselves to make sure students like this have the help they need. Children like this have the help they need. So that money exists. This is not a no money calculation. The money that Los Angeles Unified has is not enough. We're going to have to make some hard choices. We're going to have to streamline what we do, reduce redundancy so that we do the best possible job we can to make sure that we have nurses where we can afford it, to make sure that we have the smallest possible class size, to make sure we provide as fair wage as we can. But we're sort of on the precipice, Steve, and I think if we can convince Governor Newsom, the incoming legislature, and our voters that we need the same support for our students that they just provided for the city and the county and H and Triple H, I think a decade from now we'll look back and say, wow, we were able to do it. So part of that foundation is already there with H and Triple H. We need to make sure the same thing exists on the student side.
In a manner of speaking, some of the critics of LA Unified are now in charge. So you can't kick this over to somebody else. What have you learned in the time that you've been on the board and the time you've been superintendent? Is there anything that you thought you knew that you found out, well, that's not right? And isn't the onus on you and the board to figure all of this out, to do the politics of getting more support from city, county, and state, to figure out how to get whatever services can help address the housing shortage and all of that? I mean, it's on you guys right now.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, and what I would say is I've learned a lot since I've been on the board for a year and 4 months, I believe. So I've learned a lot. I think I am more optimistic about the kind of education we're providing in LA Unified now than I was before I was on the board, because I've had the chance to visit every single one of my 165 schools. I've met with every principal. I've talked to them about their challenges, but also their successes. And I feel really good about the education we're providing in Board District 6 in the East San Fernando Valley. In terms of the broader challenges, though, we see that so many of our students in the East San Fernando Valley are dealing with poverty, are dealing with homelessness, other traumas like community violence. And so I think it is on us to build those partnerships. It's on us to, work with the city attorney and make sure our students have safe passages to school. It's on us to work with the city council to make sure that they're addressing the homelessness that our students are facing. And so I take that responsibility really seriously. I've been to Sacramento 3 or 4 times in my short time on the board, making sure that our legislators know that additional funding to our public schools will make a tremendous difference, not just now, but many generations in the future. And so I think it's on us, but I also think it's an abdication of responsibility if our other elected officials don't recognize that the things that happen in our community outside of school absolutely affect the education of our students in the classroom.
I find usually that the people who are saying you can't throw money at this problem are the people who do not have kids in those schools.
Yeah, absolutely.
We don't have a lot of time left, and I want to, before we close this out, refer to a question here. There's a lot of, I heard from a lot of critics during the course of this 4-part series, putting a lot of blame on the families that are in these difficult housing situations and questioning their decisions. And then I heard from a lot of people who wanted to help. And I think maybe that's because we told some human stories. People liked reading about Principal Raza, somebody who's giving it everything along with his whole staff and the teachers there. I think people want to try to make a difference. And my question for you is, how can people get involved? Whether people do or do not have students in LA Unified, and they want to do something to help. I mean, we have run in the LA Times information about how to send a check to the donations fund at Telfair Elementary, where it's used to pay for school uniforms and the after-school science programs and the mariachi programs. But what do each of you tell people about how they can get involved and support this, and why should they? What do you tell them about why they should support the students of LA Unified?
To me, I make it as personal as I can. I'm a proud product of public education. Wouldn't have the privilege of serving students today as I do in Los Angeles Unified, but for that foundation. My mom taught, my dad was an immigrant. My journey's not so dissimilar for many of these students. And what I'll tell them is to get engaged. Join us. Join us on the bus, because it's ultimately about the priority and the commitment we make as a community to support public education. So join us on the bus to Sacramento, make sure we have adequate funding. Join us in the conversation with the city and council to make sure that H and Triple H get put to work as fast as we can to help these students at Telfair and Langdon and everywhere else that the student need exists. It's wonderful to make a donation. This time of year we express our gratitude, and that's good. There's no harm in that. But I think those who want to take that next step, join us. Be part of the conversation, advocate to your elected leaders across the city, across the state, so that we have the resource we need to do the job.
Okay, I want to thank you for tuning in. I want to thank Board Member Kelly Gomez and LA Unified Superintendent Austin Buettner. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you and Francine for giving.